Well, the topic is the link between human sensitivity and addiction, alcohol addiction and drug addiction, especially, as you'll come to find out later on, CNS depressants, addiction of those that are sensitive and or empaths to alcohol, opioids, benzos, muscle relaxers, and other types of sedative drugs. After that, we'll be covering what is sensitivity and what does sensitive mean, what is a highly sensitive person, what is an empath, what does empathy mean, what are the differences and the similarities between the highly sensitive person and the empath. I'm going to be answering the question, can you be a highly sensitive person, aka an HSP is the acronym for that, and an empath, or can you only be one? Plus, the main kind of thesis of this presentation for you, why are sensitive humans so prone to addiction, especially to CNS depressants, as I mentioned? Do sensitives need different approaches to addiction treatment? What are the key concepts a sensitive person with an addiction should know? What are the key concepts a sensitive person without an addiction should know? And what are some helpful resources for highly sensitive people and empaths, such as like books, podcasts, YouTube channels, documentaries, interviews, free online assessments, which I'm going to be sharing with you, the highly sensitive person free online assessment, as well as the empath free online assessment, and I'll be discussing websites and some blogs, etc. All right, with that big, huge overview covered, now let's get right into this fascinating topic. Here's a frame for this topic, and it's the link between sensitivity and addiction, and it's not too complicated. In the not too distant past, the sensitive people were the shamans. I learned that from Dr. Gabor Mate. But nowadays, the sensitive people are the odd ones out, as according to the scientific research of Dr. Elaine Aron and her team, they've found that 15 to 20% of the human population are sensitive, and thus busy city life in first world countries was developed for the majority and not the minority, aka the 15 to 20% who are highly sensitive people. And as you'll come to learn in a in-depth fashion, sensitives can be highly unhealthy in their mind-body and even mind-body-spirit complexes with overloaded sensory stimuli, stress, and more. You can think of it as there being kind of a mismatch within a mismatch, or a double mismatch that's contributing to synergistic strength issues. And this is not a good thing. Firstly, we humans evolved to do our best surrounded in nature with pure and clean foods and water, an environment free of unhealthy and damaging toxins and diseases and other major distortions to purity. Yeah, back then we didn't have medical care, and there was a lot of predators, and food wasn't certain. You had to go hunt for your food and gather your food, and you had to worry about other tribes and animal predators and hardcore harsh weather and a lot more. I mean, so the average lifespan back then was short, but they sure had a pristine nature environment, pristine plants and animals in purity. Must have been so beautiful. But nowadays our civilization is not conducive to radiant mind-body-spirit health, and it's seriously taking its toll, and especially among sensitives and empaths. That's just one population that's more prone to imbalance, mental health issues, addiction, disease, and other health issues. Then, within the society that is already unhealthy just for humans in general that we're now living in, most of us are, not everybody, there's some people that live in very healthy with their environment situations where people are growing their own food and just surrounded, totally immersed in nature. But most of us, we're not doing that. We're living within the grid. And so it's an unhealthy grid for people, human beings in general. And it's also even more unhealthy for sensitive people, empaths, and highly sensitive empaths. The sensitives and empaths are living in an unhealthy and unnatural matrix, while it's ill-suited for all humans like I said before, just in general, it's especially quite ill-suited for the sensitives and empaths, as they're the large minority, again, and thus society was created for people, mostly the non-sensitives and non-empaths. And commonly all over the world, people are using alcohol, benzos, not just using, but self-medicating with, abusing, becoming addicted to alcohol, benzos, opioids, other CNS depressants, other drugs, basically to self-medicate hypersensitivity to physical sensory stimuli, and or to self-medicate hyperempathy to numb feeling the emotions of others. It can be brutal, you know, a large reason that I became so heavily, severely addicted for almost 20 years of my life to various different things, especially at the beginning cannabis, which was at least a mild substance, and then after that alcohol, after that benzos, after that opioids, and I abused and experimented with and mixed and matched and used many other drugs too. Those were just all my favorites. It was alcohol, opioids, and benzos and cannabis. But then eventually I didn't like cannabis because it gave me anxiety. And I didn't like alcohol eventually towards the end. I would still drink alcohol and make bad decisions, but I didn't prefer alcohol towards the last couple of years of my addiction. I preferred opioids or opioids and benzos, or at least benzos. So I guess alcohol is like my third choice, but since I couldn't always get the pills, I would use alcohol, some type of CNS depressant that could calm down, because I'm a moderate on the spectrum of sensitivity and on the spectrum of empathy. I'd say I'm a moderate HSP and a moderate empath. And the reason I would say this is because there's free online assessments, which I'm going to educate you on and show you where to find them if you want to take these too. And so I took those and just judged on my scores on there. It looked like I was about moderate to about. And so that's not such a big deal if when you're growing up as a kid, you learn about that. Maybe your mom or your dad, or maybe you learn it from a counselor or learn it in school. You learn about, okay, you have this trait, or both these traits in my case. And so you're different than other people, and here's how you're different. And here's some of the pros, and here's some of the potential cons, and here's what you gotta remember, and here's, how the rest of society, some things might be too harsh, too stressful for you, too intense. But that didn't happen. I grew up thinking, why the hell am I so different than everyone else? Why did God give everybody else, everything they need, and for some reason well, not necessarily everything they need, but I felt for so long in my life that I was lacking a certain something that other people had. And I felt like an outcast, an outsider, never fit in. It was just, there was just something different about me. I never felt comfortable in my own skin. I kind of felt like an alien in a human body. I don't feel like that nowadays, but I really did. And so that was my alcohol, opioids, benzos, and then also other drugs. That was my way to numb, self-medicate, mitigate the sensitivity and the empathy that was way too much for me to handle. Because back then, I was more sensitive and I was more empathic back then. I was just a wreck. And I was like so new at life and hadn't learned a lot and had a fixed mindset and hadn't developed wisdom or anything. But anyways, before I get off on too many tangents here, until a sensitive person develops a lifestyle that honors their sensitivity, typically they can expect easier times having imbalance, stress, addiction, overwhelm, illness, mental health issues, and all sorts of other shit. But there is hope, because once a sensitive person develops a lifestyle that deeply honors, not just honors, deeply honors and respects their sensitivity, well then, balance, wellness, happiness, peace, and a whole lot more are much easier to achieve. Now let's shift gears And let's go deeper. Let's get underneath or behind the information and concepts that we just covered. What is sensitivity? The word sensitive is an adjective, and it means quick to detect or respond to slight changes, signals, or influences. Responsive to physical stimuli. Able to feel or perceive. Empath is a noun, and it's one who experiences the emotions of others. And empathy, a noun, is the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of another. And the highly sensitive person phenomenon, the HSP, which I didn't even learn about until my mid-30s. I learned it from a girl that I was living with, and we were engaged at the time. We never got married. But she brought up highly sensitive person and asked me if I was one, and I said, I don't know what the heck that is. And so she taught me about it, and then I took the online assessment, and yeah, it looked like I was about a moderate, highly sensitive person, and it just, huge light bulb, kind of a similar magnitude of awesomeness, the light bulb when I learned about how addiction affects the neurotransmitters, and different drugs bind to different receptors and then mimic different neurotransmitters that we already create naturally, such as alcohol binds to GABA receptors and produces GABA and dopamine, and in some people even serotonin and endorphin, and then opioids bind to the opioid receptors and they produce endorphin and dopamine when you take them, and benzos, when you take them, bind to GABA receptors and they boost GABA and dopamine, and cocaine, when you take it, just boosts a ton of dopamine. Individuals with the highly sensitive person trait have an overactive or hyperactive CNS, and they can get overstimulated very easily, which can make them more prone to alcohol addiction, opioid addiction, benzo addiction, and other drugs that calm down the hyperactive central nervous system. Here are some common traits of HSPs. Being easily overwhelmed by sensory stimuli such as loud noises, crowded places, and bright lights. Feeling a strong need for downtime during and or after busy, hectic days. Being deeply moved by nature, beauty, art, music, and the like. Deep intuition and creativity, and a rich inner world of thoughts and feelings. This is an innate biological trait that 1 in 5 people, approximately 15 to 20% of people, and more than 100 species of animals too. They found that as well. About 15 to 20% of the animals too. I know that my bird Papaya is a highly sensitive parrot. She's an HSP too. Highly sensitive parrot. I'm going crazy. The technical term for highly sensitive person is sensory processing sensitivity, SPS, and it's a personal disposition to being sensitive to subtle stimuli and being easily over-aroused by external stimuli. Since it's in such a high percentage of the population, they've proposed it as just a human neurobiological trait, and it's not a disorder because it comes in too many people. 15 to 20%, it's not a disorder, but it's also not well understood by the general population, by the mainstream, by the masses. I mean, nowadays more and more people are starting to learn this stuff, but still, even today, not a lot of people know what sensory processing sensitivity is, or even highly sensitive person, that term. The way I found out that I was one, if you go to hsperson.com/test, there is a free highly sensitive person self-test. It's really simple, and if you answered more than 14 of the questions as true of yourself, you're probably highly sensitive. There's also a documentary on this phenomenon, and it's called Sensitive, and it features Alanis Morissette, who's a highly sensitive person, and she's in a big part of the documentary. It's a pretty good documentary. Absolutely worth watching if you are resonating with this and you're new to this and you want to learn more about it. And then there's the Highly Sensitive Person book by Elaine Aron, PhD, which surprisingly I still haven't read. Oh, and you know what I should do? I should read you a handful of questions from the highly sensitive person test. All right, it looks like there's about 27 questions, and then there's a box that you can check off to the left of the questions. And so if the question is a yes, then you just check it off, and if it's a no, you just leave the box blank. And then at the bottom, there's a button where you click to see your total. Here's a few of the questions. I am easily overwhelmed by strong sensory input. I seem to be aware of subtleties in my environment. Other people's moods affect me. I tend to be very sensitive to pain. I find myself needing to withdraw during busy days, into bed or into a darkened room, or in any place where I can have some privacy and relief from stimulation. I am particularly sensitive to the effects of caffeine. I am easily overwhelmed by things like bright lights, strong smells, coarse fabrics, or sirens close by. I have a rich, complex inner life. I am made uncomfortable by loud noises. All right, that was more than a handful, but I read them quickly. Now moving on to the next phenomenon, which is the empath. To teach you about what an empath is, I really want to go over to the Wikipedia page, which I do sometimes on this podcast, like I did for when we were covering wisdom recently in a podcast. And I loved the Wikipedia page on impulsivity too, which we did a podcast about. So now let's revisit Wikipedia to learn about the empath trait and empathy. Empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference. That is, the capacity to place oneself in another's position. The English word empathy is derived from the ancient Greek empathia, meaning physical affection or passion. Types of empathy include cognitive empathy, emotional or affective empathy, somatic empathy, and spiritual empathy. Compassion and sympathy are terms associated with empathy. In psychology, empaths, from ancient Greek empath, passion, are people who have a higher than usual level of empathy, called hyperempathy. While objective empathy level testing is difficult, tests such as the EQ8 have gained some acceptance as tests for being empathic. Highly sensitive person is also often synonymous, but is also used to describe sensory processing sensitivity. In parapsychology, the mechanism for being an empath is claimed to be psychic channeling. Psychics and mediums claim to channel the emotional states and experiences of other living beings or the spirits of dead people in the form of emotional resonance. The term empath is sometimes used in a broader sense to describe someone who is more adept at understanding, i.e., is more sensitive to the feelings of others than the average person, or as a descriptor for someone who is higher on an empathic spectrum of sorts. Seen in this way, an empath is someone who can perceive, understand, or share the feelings of another person, without necessarily believing said feelings, are being directly communicated to them through some as yet unknown second sight mechanism or telepathic channel. The term's modern usage flows mostly from the work of American psychiatrist Judith Orloff. Orloff uses the term to describe people who have an innate ability to read the emotional state of others. She believes that empaths are able to sense the thoughts, feelings, and energy of those around them, and that they are able to use this ability to provide healing or comfort to others if they manage their condition correctly. Although empaths are often associated with the paranormal, the concept has been studied and researched by scientists. Neuroscientists have found evidence to suggest that some people have greater or lesser ability to share and feel the emotions of others. Mirror neurons are neurons that fire when an animal acts and when the animal observes the same action performed by another. Interfering with the level of activation of mirror neurons via transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, has been experimentally studied. Overactivity of mirror neurons is a possible explanation of hyperempathy. If you want to take a free empath test online, there's one on lonerwolf.com/empath-test. lonerwolf.com/empath-test. test. And that leads us to the summary and key concepts. I just want to make sure that we have covered everything that I wanted to cover. So, what is a highly sensitive person? The scientific term for highly sensitive person is sensory processing sensitivity, SPS, which is a temperamental or personality trait that involves increased sensitivity of the central nervous system and a deeper cognitive processing of physical, social, and emotional stimuli. A human with a particularly high measure of SPS is considered to be a highly sensitive person, HSP. This is not a disorder, but rather an innate biological trait. It can lead to both negative and positive experiences. The trait is normal, found in 15 to 20% of the population, too many to be a disorder, but not enough to be well understood by the majority of those around you. It is innate, and biologists have found it in over 100 species, and probably there are many more. The brains of highly sensitive persons actually work a little differently than others. This trait reflects a certain type of survival strategy, being observant before acting. You are more aware than others of subtleties. This is mainly because your brain processes information and reflects on it more deeply. So even if you wear glasses, for example, you see more than others by noticing more. These are all helpful bullet points I'm reading off right now from Dr. Elaine Aron's website with a highly sensitive person quiz on there. There's a few more. You are more aware than others of subtleties. This is mainly because you are also more easily overwhelmed. If you notice everything, you are naturally going to be overstimulated when things are too intense, complex, chaotic, or novel for a long time. The trait is not a new discovery, but it has been misunderstood. Because HSPs prefer to look before entering new situations, they are often called shy. But shyness is learned, not innate. In fact, 30% of HSPs are extroverts, although the trait is often mislabeled as introversion. It also has been called inhibitedness, fearfulness, or neuroticism. Some HSPs behave in these ways, but it is not innate to do so and not the basic trait. Sensitivity is valued differently in different cultures. In cultures where it is not valued, HSPs tend to have low self-esteem. They are told, don't be so sensitive, so that they feel abnormal. To review, what is an empath? A person that has a higher than usual level of empathy or hyperempathy. The three empathetic categories include cognitive empathy, the ability to identify how someone else is feeling; emotional empathy, being able to feel someone else's emotions; compassionate empathy, actively wanting to help someone in need. A full empath has developed skills in all three categories. What are the differences and similarities between HSPs and empaths? The similarities are that they're both types of human sensitivity. One is the actual sensitivity to physical sensory stimuli, and the other one is sensitivity to emotions and thoughts of others. You can be one or the other, and you can also be both. Like, for instance, I have both sensory processing sensitivity and I'm an empath. And why are sensitive humans prone to addiction, and primarily, especially CNS depressants, as I said? Well, it's because sensitive humans in a crazy world made for non-sensitive people during these seemingly apocalyptic end times of destruction and mayhem and crime and murder and addiction and mental illness and natural disasters and holy wars and proxy wars and corruption, gaslighting, hypocrisy, deceit, lies, inflation, division, polarity, a collective consciousness that is very low vibration and low consciousness right now and getting worse and worse. Hopefully moving into Thanksgiving, well, guaranteed moving into the holidays, it'll help to raise the consciousness back up for a while. So let's hope that helps to soothe all the inflammation of the planet right now with everything going on, like a nice soothing balm, nice cooling soothing balm. Like, we can only pray for it. Do sensitives need different approaches to addiction treatment? Oftentimes, for recovery, for not necessarily for like drug or alcohol detox treatment or something like that, but for lifestyle, for relapse prevention. Yeah, absolutely. Almost always sensitives and or empaths need different approaches to addiction treatment, addiction recovery, long-term living than somebody that is not. For instance, like myself, I'm a moderate empath and a moderate HSP. It was only when I developed a lifestyle that deeply honored and respected both of those, moderate intensity traits that synergize with each other, in my opinion. Is only when I developed a lifestyle really conducive for balance with having those that I was able to really start to feel my happiest and most fulfilled and most at peace. And finally, after a life of living with so much anxiety, you develop the right lifestyle for having your particular sensitivities. If you also have some of this stuff going on, it's just the key. It's the biggest key, and most people don't change their whole lifestyle. And a lot of people have one or both of these traits, and they don't even know. And they don't even know what it is. That was me for 35 years, and it's not ideal, but it's all good. It is what it is. I highly recommend checking out resources by Dr. Elaine Aron for highly sensitive people, statistics, facts, resources, and her just basically, if you want to learn about the highly sensitive person, her website's pretty much a one-stop shop. Dr. Elaine Aron is the world's foremost expert on this topic. She did so much research on it in the 90s and has written books and developed the tests and has given who knows how many speeches around the world about it. Additionally, you could go to a local bookstore, physical, brick and mortar bookstore, and go to the section on probably like psychology, and they're probably going to have a bunch of books, or at least several, about highly sensitive people and empaths. Maybe just go hang out at the bookstore with a cup of pumpkin spice latte and then just start going through the book section. Or go online and do what I do and just go on Amazon and order the Audible or order a physical book. And with all that being said, thanks so much for joining me on this episode. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.
Hi, my friend. Matt Finch here, introducing the extraordinary flagship program created by Chris Scott, the founder of Fit Recovery. This is a one-of-a-kind online program for dominating alcohol through biochemical optimization, mindset, and more. Why continue to test out trial and error when you could follow a powerful and proven 100% customizable system? Get instant access to over 20 hours of step-by-step video instruction, the ability to ask your questions of Chris Scott and his head coach Matt Finch, that's me, and the rest of the life-changing and transformation-catalyzing features and benefits included in the program. To learn more, read or watch testimonials, and get started, visit fitrecovery.com/course. And to save an additional $25, use coupon code 444 at fitrecovery.com/course.